Alright, we back at it again with another video. Alright, Mr. Nightmare uploaded again. I'll say Mr. Upload. Anyway, smash that like button, stay tuned, and let's get into it. Right.
When I was a senior in high school, during my last spring semester, I had taken all of the classes that I needed to take, and I had an extra hour during the day that I could use to just study.
Right.
I had an entire classroom to myself for studying, but I would usually just play games on my phone. It was during my third period, so I couldn't go home early or anything like that, but it was still a nice break for me. One day, I got to my study hour and actually had some homework to do. I began working and went for about 20 minutes until I heard an announcement come over the school intercom. It was an announcement of a lockdown, and everyone was instructed to lock their doors and return to their classrooms if they were not in them. I wasn't quite sure if this was a drill or not at first, so I went over and shut the door. The classroom that I was in was in a wing of the school that was farthest from the locker commons and cafeteria, so I figured no teachers would come over there or hear anything. So I just went back to my homework. I will admit though, I was slightly scared, but really I thought nothing of it, because in my time at that high school, we had had 2 previous lockdowns, which were basically just false alarms. I was working on my homework when suddenly I heard a knocking at the door. I walked over to the door and saw a kid outside. I opened the door and he told me he had seen a guy in the hallway. The kid seemed to be in a panic, so I let him in the room and we locked the door. The kid explained to me that he went out for a drink of water and saw an older-looking creepy guy walking towards him. The kid wasn't able to get back to his original classroom because he would have to go past the creepy guy. I turned off the lights in the classroom and we both went to the back corner. We sat there in pitch black silence for several minutes.
I don't know, something seems fishy about that. Yeah, that story seems off. Not gonna lie.
I whispered over to the kid and asked him what his name was, but he appeared to be gone. Then there was another knocking at the door to the classroom. I was pretty scared at this point, but I slowly got up and walked over to the door. I listened on the other side and heard someone say police. I was shocked. I opened up the door to see several officers. One of them pulled me out of the room immediately. I was as confused as can be, but then I saw them go into the room and a short time later come out with the kid that I had let in. They led him away and they told me that he had been the reason for the lockdown. As it turns out, he was a former student who had graduated 2 years earlier. He had gone to the school and had made several threats against the school, but was seen by a staff member shortly after entering. It really creeped me out knowing I had been alone in a classroom with him.
So figure that.
This story happened my senior year of high school, which was about 5 years ago now. That year, they added this new room at the back part of the school. I can't remember the exact name they used for the room, but it was basically just an area with several computers and tables, and it was used for giving students extra help with school or making up tests and things like that. It had been made out of an old abandoned classroom that wasn't used for several years. At this time, I had been out of school for 2 days with an ear infection, and in that time, I missed a math test. When I returned to the math teacher, he allowed me to make up the test during study hall, so I went to that new room to take it. The teacher, Mr. Marcus, didn't want to have to go to the room and watch me take the test, so he let me go by myself and said he trusted me not to cheat. I walked all the way over to the room, which was pretty much on the complete opposite end of the school, and once I got to the room, I sat down and began the test. It wasn't too long of a test, but it was a really important one. Right when I got to the third question, the telephone in the room started ringing. I didn't want to get up and answer it, but I figured it was probably Mr. Marcus. I walked over and picked it up. When I did, I was told we were under a lockdown and there was a suspicious person in the building. I was scared being all by myself back in this room with nobody else there, and there wasn't even a classroom next to me I could go to, because this classroom was between 2 locker rooms for the gym, which was also nearby. I did what I was instructed to do and shut the door. As I did, I decided to take a quick look out into the hallway. It was completely empty and quiet as well. I went back in and decided to turn off the lights. I went out of sight of the door and went towards the back. Then I took out my phone and used the screen to give me some light to try to do more questions of the test. However, I couldn't really focus with us being in a lockdown. Suddenly, I heard the door to the room that I was in.
See, during these lockdown those, like, you should really, like, if you can't leave the building, make it your key to, like, just close the door. Close the door, lock it, right? And don't open it for nobody and make sure it's locked. If the classroom door don't lock, if your classroom have a window, go out there. If you have a vent where you can fit in there, go in there. It is what it is. Like, you know what I'm saying? But if you near an exit, you need to leave. But if not, you need to lock that door. If that door locked, don't open it for nobody until you actually hear people on the speaker talking about, lockdown is lifted, If you don't hear that, I don't even care if it sound like somebody, like a security guard or police. If it sound like them, like, nah, you can't. Gotta hear it on the speaker first. Because some people might do that, to make it sound like, oh, it's the police, but, people have game. I'm just saying, can't do that.
Open. It was at that moment that I remembered I hadn't locked the door. Quickly.
See? You always lock the door on lockdowns. You always lock the doors. Always. And that's what I'm saying. It's like these people playing with their lives, like you're not locking the door. Always lock the door and don't open it.
I ducked down underneath the table that I was at. I could see just barely from under the table a small amount of light coming in from the doorway and saw boots on the ground. At least they appeared to be boots, as I couldn't really see much. I was terrified, and I held my breath so that I wouldn't make a sound. Whoever was in there stood in the doorway for a while, and then the door shut. I barely heard footsteps walking into the room. I was literally shaking, trying not to make a sound. The room then went completely silent and remained that way. I slowly breathed in and out as quietly as I could. I was expecting at any moment to feel someone grab me from behind or something like that. But then, out of nowhere, I heard the sound of a computer falling off a desk to the ground. Then I heard the noise of a man yelling and screaming. It seemed as though whoever was in this room had gone into a rage and was screaming and smashing things. I opened my eyes and looked over. I still couldn't really see anything, but I could hear where all the noise was coming from, and it was at the opposite end of the classroom to my left. I was terrified and knew I needed to get out of there. The exit was directly in front of me and to the right, and the noises were directly in front of me to the left, so I figured I had to make a run for it. I took a deep breath, and then got out from under the desk and ran as fast as I could, as whoever was in there continued to seemingly destroy things in the room. I ran forward to the door and was just barely able to see where I was going. I stumbled into a chair just before the door, but I was still able to make it out. I heard the man yelling as I left the room and sprinted down the hallway. I ran all the way to the front end of the school, where I saw a police officer. I yelled where the guy was and that he was destroying things. Another officer led me out of the school. After some time, I was able to calm down and they ended up catching the man. I got to go home right after that. I feel so lucky that I made it out of that room, because obviously whoever was in there was very dangerous.
Dangerous. Better be glad you made it out.
In my freshman year of high school, during the first semester, I had a civics class as my last class of the day. The school that I went to was pretty average size, I would say. I remember the class that I was in had about 20 kids in it. It was a couple of months into the school year at this point, and on this Thursday afternoon, we were all just listening to the teacher go through some announcements, when suddenly the phone in the classroom rang. The teacher, Mrs. Lindstrom, walked over and answered it. Then she hung up and told us all that the school was going under a lockdown. She seemed pretty serious and told us that this was not a drill. She locked her classroom door and then turned out the lights and instructed us to the back end of the classroom. We all got up from our desks and went to the back. There was a lot of whispering going on, but nobody seemed to know why we were under a lockdown. The longer we all sat back there, the more concerned everyone seemed to get, which made me start to worry. I started thinking of all the possibilities of what could be going on. It got really quiet after a while, and at one point, we heard footsteps going down the hallway, but we didn't know whose they were. The lockdown went on for probably 30 more minutes before there was another call to the classroom announcing that the lockdown had been ended. We returned to class for the final 15 minutes or so, but the only thing on my mind was what could have caused it. School was dismissed after that, and I left school to get on my bus. When I got outside the school, I noticed several police cars with flashing lights. Everyone was talking about the lockdown, and I heard several rumors about what it was. But it wasn't until later that night where I got the real answer. My friend Robbie, whose mother worked at the school, told me that the lockdown had been caused by a student who claimed to see a strange man wandering the halls. However, after an extensive search of the school, one of the back doors was seen to be open, and it was determined that the man had left. The area was briefly searched, but the man was never found. The next day, when I went back to school, everything seemed to be pretty normal. And by the time I got to third hour, I had forgotten all about what had happened the day before. It was a Friday, so I was pretty much just excited to go to the football game that night. In the middle of my third hour class, which was history, I had to go to the bathroom. I knew the teacher was one of the nicer ones who didn't require a pass or anything, so I just asked and she allowed me to go. I walked down the halls of the bathrooms, which are towards the end. As soon as I opened the door and got inside, I came face to face with a man who I had never seen before. He was wearing a winter hat and had long black hair and a small beard. He looked really surprised to see me. We both stood there staring at each other for a second or two. Then the man came towards me and I turned and ran. I ran back to class. When I got back, I told my teacher what I had seen, and the school once again went on another lockdown. This time we stayed locked down for over an hour. I was terrified, but finally it ended, and afterwards everyone was allowed to go home early. They told us the man had finally been caught, but what I don't understand is how they didn't find him the first time the school was locked down, and what he was doing inside there in the first place.
Yeah, these stories, man, they something else though. They really something else. That's why you always gotta be careful when it's a lockdown and anything. Lockdown, get your way out of there. Don't even stay around. Whew, I'm about to be editing. Nighttime spook. That's what it is. Actually, nighttime spooks. Keep it cool, keep it classy. Stay tuned. I love the gang. So all you gotta do is just support and stay tuned. That's all I'm asking for. That's all I'm asking for is support and stay tuned. And see you guys in the next video. Peace out.